Now, there's a second issue that I think you really need to deal with as part of the framework, and one of that second issue is, do you compare competition and its excesses, competition when it's gone out of control, when it's run wild, to cooperation when it's at its best, when it's the way we think of it as something positive? What I think the affirmative needs to be very careful to police the negative on, and keep the negative honest on, is to say, you can't take one at its worst and compare it to the other at its best, because that's simply not a fair comparison. If we were going to have a debate over resolved driving is better than walking, it wouldn't be fair to say, oh, well, a nice, pleasant walk in the park on a beautiful day. Well, of course that's better than being involved in a car wreck that rips off all four of your limbs and smashes your head in. Well, maybe you take a typical walk versus a typical drive, and you compare the two, and you get a slightly more fair and more accurate, more meaningful comparison. So the affirmative should say, if you're going to talk about how competition can spin out of control, you also need to talk about how cooperation can be very manipulative, how it can be a form of collusion, how when certain people cooperate, they exclude other people. And you have to talk about the negatives of cooperation as well, so that you have a fair basis for comparison. Now, the negative should come back and say that not all things have the same tendency to be positive or negative. You know, if you talk about just which would be a better use of a beautiful afternoon, sitting on your porch reading a book or going out and playing lawn darts, well, lawn darts can be fun for the entire family, but there's a reason that lawn darts were banned and taken off the market. It's because they are so very dangerous that people suffered debilitating injuries and in some cases were killed. Now, at their best, they certainly don't do that. At their best, they're a lot of fun. But their tendency is not to be at their best. And the negative can make a similar argument about competition. It does tend to spin out of control. It does tend to bring out the worst in people. It does have kind of a gravitational force that draws itself towards its excesses. Now, on each side, there are answers that you can make, but once again, those are just ways to open up. There's a third and final framework issue that I think you have to deal with, and this is a framework issue that happens on just about every topic. What should the affirmative do if there's a balanced negative? Now, balanced negatives have become very much sort of the nightmare of debaters, and something that a lot of affirmatives get kind of scared off of because they do seem very powerful and they do seem very effective. I am convinced, and I was convinced before I ever sent this topic proposal in, that the topic is written in such a way that the affirmative has available a very powerful argument that a balanced negative does not answer the question. The topic that you had this past year, idealism and pragmatism, it did not contain a measure. It didn't talk about toward what purpose. So it lent itself very much to a balanced negative. Which is better when they're in conflict, idealism or pragmatism? Well, the negative could say, you can't ever say for all time that one is better than the other is better. What you have to do is both are in a dialectical tension. They pull at one another, and that tension has to be negotiated in every single case. And because there is no outcome that the topic sort of orients the comparison toward, that's something that's very easy for the negative to win. I don't think it's as easy with this topic wording. Here's how I think you make the argument. I think you say, the topic says that competition is superior to cooperation as a means of achieving excellence. So, to say that they are both, you have to maintain them both, that you have to keep them in balance, each one contributes, doesn't answer the question. The topic is asking, yes, but which one does more? I have a couple of ways that you can illustrate this. One way is, you might say, and you can even use these in debates if you want, one way, let's say that you had a topic, resolved, forks are better than spoons. Let's even parallel the wording from this year and say, resolved, when you can't hold them both in one hand, forks are better than spoons. Well, if I were the negative, I would very definitely go for a balanced negative there. I would say, it depends on what food you're eating. There are some foods for which forks are better. There are some foods for which spoons are better, which is why we put them both on the table. They're both part of a complete table setting. And that's a classic balanced negative. But now what if the topic was resolved, and I'm going to turn it around because otherwise it's unwinnable, resolved, spoons are better than forks for eating soup. You going to go with a balanced negative now? Or are you going to say, well, sometimes you need a fork to eat soup? Well, no, you don't. Now that you know what that comparison is aimed at, it's a lot easier to say balanced negatives don't answer the question. Now, they could still say that excellence is a broad enough goal that cooperation and competition both coexist, and you'll find there's a huge literature talking about the sort of symbiotic relationship they have toward one another, and people have even coined terms like co-opetition. And you'll find that people have written essays and even books saying that each one depends on the other, and it seems as though this is just all evidence that's going to help the negative win a balance. But I don't think that that's going to be terribly effective, because the question that's being asked here is which one contributes more. Here's another topic that you ought to consider, another hypothetical topic. The topic is resolved, taking antibiotics is superior to getting enough sleep. Well, now, if I were the negative on that, once again, I would say balance negative. If you want to stay healthy, you need to do both. You need to take medication when appropriate, and you need to get enough sleep, because that's a way that you keep your body's defenses at their maximum. But now, what if the topic was resolved that taking antibiotics is superior to getting sleep as a means of curing an upper respiratory infection? Even if the negative tried to say, well, you should do both. If you're sick, you should take what the doctor prescribed, and you should get enough sleep. Both are good ways to fight off illness. The affirmative could still say, but the topic says which one is superior, and the affirmative interpretation of that should be which one contributes more. And now think about, can you have a debate on that? If you've got an upper respiratory infection, is getting a lot of sleep going to do more to fend it off, or is taking an antibiotic? Remember, this is an infection. Is an antibiotic going to do more than getting enough sleep? Probably the affirmative is going to have no trouble at all dismissing the balance negative, saying, yes, they're both important. That begs the question. The question is, between the two, which one does more? So what application does that have for affirmatives on this topic? What you should do, first of all, you want to be very savvy in how you define excellence. And in some of the videos in the future, the next video that I plan to do, I'm actually going to take on a number of definitions, how you can use definitions very strategically to set yourself up to best advantage on both sides. And I'm going to talk about defining competition, defining cooperation, and defining excellence, and possibly a couple of other terms as well. We may get into means as well. But if you define excellence in a savvy fashion, then you can say, cooperation and competition are both a part of it, very definitely. But which one accomplishes more? Which one is more influential? And I think you'll be very well situated to say that a balanced negative doesn't answer the question. Now, when it comes down to the actual meat of the case, when it comes down to your illustrations, what are you going to make the case for your side of the topic? I have a couple of thoughts about this. It seems to me, my first sort of swipe at this, that the affirmative would be on very firm ground if they were to take law, government, and social institutions as their kind of cluster of illustrations. And here are some of the thoughts that I have. I think that you first of all can talk about the legal system. Talk about how in our country, what we have is we have adversarial justice, that there's a prosecuting attorney and a defense attorney, and that there is, in lawsuits, there's the plaintiff and the respondent, or the complainant and the respondent. It varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Now, in some other parts of the world, they don't have an adversarial system of justice. They have an inquisitorial system of justice, where the judge actually gets involved, asks questions, and really kind of serves as an investigator, and there's not a make the best case for one side, make the best case for the other side. And you can find research that says our way is better, that the prosecution should make the very best possible case that the defendant is guilty, and the defense attorney should make the very best possible case that the defendant is not guilty, and then you let a jury decide, having heard the strongest arguments for both sides. Now, what is that? That's competition. And what does competition do in that situation? It moves the audience, the jury, toward having the best possible sort of collection of information to make a decision. Is this person guilty or not? So the adversarial system of justice is a very, very good way to defend. Competition gets you the best, most fair, most just outcome of all. And of course it lets Lincoln Douglas debaters do what they love to do, which is throw around the word justice.